Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Well, you must have known that this was coming, given the content of my latest videos. This is the absolute centerpiece of DLC Volume 1 for the Porsche packs on Assetto Corsa. This is the 918 Spider. This is Porsche's hypercar. This is Porsche's answer to LaFerrari and the McLaren P1. This is the most insane thing ever to come out of Stuttgart as far as I'm concerned when it comes to road use. The 918, as some of you may know, is already out of production. It was produced between 2013 and 2015 to the very coincidental and totally unintentional, massive sarcasm, number of 918 units. Of those cars, it seems that about 290 of them went to the United States. Canada had about 35 orders as far as I know, and I'm not quite sure what the numbers are for Europe. I assume most of the remainder of that went to Europe. I'm sure a few went to Asia as well. But here it is. It is the most insane thing ever to come out of Stuttgart. We've got under the hood a 4.6-liter V8, naturally aspirated, no turbo on this thing, which is somewhat unusual for a Porsche, but that power boost that you're used to from a turbo still very much exists in the form of two electric motors, one on each axle, that supplement the power of the 4.6-liter 8-cylinder monster power plant. The engine by itself, it is absolutely ridiculous in its power output. Normally aspirated, remember, a little over 4.5 liters, 608 horsepower from the engine by itself, plus you've got those two electric motors on the front and rear axle, putting a combined power output of 279 horsepower, so you have 887 horsepower in this car. That's less power than LaFerrari, and that's less power than the McLaren P1. Now, how does Porsche make up for that power deficit? Because, well, power is everything when it comes to hypercars. This car has got a very unique system. It's four-wheel drive, so nothing too surprising there, but obviously you've got torque vectoring, which happens not through the engine's drivetrain per se, but it happens with a combination of the engine, transmission, and those electric motors powering all the axles. And you've also got a very innovative four-wheel steering system on this car, which actually makes it a little bit shocking, electric puns all over the place, to drive. Four-wheel steering, it's not new. I remember, at least in the United States in the early 2000s, there was a Chevy truck that introduced four-wheel steering. So, I mean, it's something that's been out there for a long time, and I'm sure that there were prototypes for systems like that in existence for decades. But on this thing, when you drive it, it's unique. You have to begin to account for it because it's difficult to get your head around just how it reacts and when it's going to react. So if you've seen the video of this car racing some of its stablemates around Mugello, you'll notice that I had a few very, very strange moments in heavy braking areas, and that's because the rear axle is actually reacting with steering input to counter what the car wants to do when it gets unstable under braking. So the car tends to twist around a little bit in the braking zones, and it takes a little while to get your head around it. I don't think you're going to be able to see the system operating here. No, indeed you cannot. But when you are underway, you get steering input from the front and rear axles. And they obviously work independently, and the rear axle is controlled by a computer. So I'm not totally sure how it reacts, or when it reacts, or why it reacts. But it does react, and you do feel it when you're out on track. You'll feel it in the sense that the car is hunting across the surface, looking for grip, and it finds grip in ways that you don't necessarily expect. Oftentimes it'll feel like you've overshot a corner, and then you'll turn into the apex anyway because you're saying, well, why the hell not? I may as well try. And the car will actually do what you want it to do, which is very, very cool. In terms of the power, you'll see how that is delivered, but it is seamless, I must say. The electric motor and the internal combustion engine, they're working in perfect harmony. The system is easier to manage than it is on LaFerrari, for example, and still more seamless than the McLaren P1. Just a better look at the exterior details now. Again, kudos, of course. They do an absolutely immaculate job recreating all of these cars. Great detail on the wheels there, in the brakes, cross-drilled ventilated rotors, the massive calipers, I believe they're 6-piston. Yep, I'm counting 3 on this side. There must be 3 on the other. Very, very cool. Nice detail there on the front end. But still not an outrageous styling package from Porsche. Porsche are very modest, I would say, in terms of their styling and generally in terms of their products. They make an absolutely amazing car, but they don't necessarily want people on the outside to know it. The car has very, very, very advanced aerodynamics. It's got active aero. That rear wing will pop up once we get underway. And of course that's going to be adding some rear downforce. In addition to the aero kit that we've got on this thing, you can see these skirts that run down the whole length of the car, exiting from the front valance there underneath the driver's side door. You can see that duct there behind the left front wheel, channeling air toward the rear to cool the engine. And of course you've got a diffuser at the back and these side skirts, these extended wheel arches, I guess you could call them, these little winglets that come around the rear tires, just helping air get channeled past the car and, of course, accelerating all the time and creating a low pressure zone at the back, exactly where you would want it. In terms of all of your other details, you've got your lights, which come up very nicely. And my favorite feature on this car, the exhausts, which exit vertically out the back right above the engine. That's very, very cool. It's evocative of their current Le Mans cars for sure, and of course it absolutely screams power. One thing that I'm very surprised at, though, is the way that they were able to get those exhausts past the environmental people, because of course the car is a plug-in hybrid technically, and it is capable of running in full electric mode in the real world, not in Assetto Corsa, but having those exhausts come out the top through what must be a very short travel distance from the exhaust ports on the engine to the exits from the collector pipes that you can see, they must have a really, really crazy trick catalyst system, because obviously it's got to pass emissions. Very nicely done. And of course, flames shoot out of them as well, which is something you always want. The cap that you can see on the B pillar here on the passenger side, that's not a fuel door, that's actually a plug-in port for the battery pack. Like I said, the car can actually run in full electric mode for the whopping distance of 12 miles. And of course not at any ridiculous speed either, but it is technically fully electric capable. In the cockpit here you can see there's not all that much going on. Yeah, free camera mode, obviously not gonna get you too much. We're morphing through the steering wheel right now, but just looking around the cockpit, I don't think they've overlooked too many details here. It does look a little bit clunky, the 2 screens that you can see just displaying the Porsche badge, but again, what do you want? It's a sim, it's not trying to emulate all of the car's internal systems, at least in terms of the driver interface, but there you go, 2 screens, one that looks like a gigantic iPad, and then the second one, a more traditional dash display. Gauge cluster, you've got a tach mounted centrally, you've got a fuel gauge over to the right, and an electric gauge, if you want to call it that. Your state of charge on the batteries. On the bottom of that, the green bar that's scrolling across the bottom of that right-hand gauge. On the left, you've got your speedometer, which has a digital readout. I mean, yes, it is an analog type gauge, but it doesn't have a needle per se. It's got a green bar that'll start scrolling around the inside of that gauge once you get underway. Also on the tachometer, in addition to the traditional needle pointing to the revs, you're also going to have a white bar that comes around the outside circumference of that gauge, and that's going to tell you how much torque your electric motors are generating. Speaking of the electric motors, you've got a couple different modes that you can use to monitor how much power is coming out of it. You've got your MGU-K, that's what AC calls it in its generic term. You've got Sport Hybrid, Race Hybrid, and Hot Lap. So Hot Lap is obviously full beans all the time. Sport Hybrid is something that I guess you'd want to use on the road. Race Hybrid is more for race situations. It's a slightly more conservative setup than Hot Lap. It'll keep the energy going for a little bit longer, but at less total output, and then Hot Lap is just full beans. So we're going to start off in Sport Hybrid. Our gearbox in this car, it's a 7-speed semi-automatic dual clutch. So go all the way up and down through the box. I don't have to use the clutch manually. In fact, I can't use the clutch manually. It just doesn't read the input because everything is handled by the computer in terms of clutch work. And of course, you can't do it that quickly yourself, so why not? Just coming out on track here, the car already gives you a very positive feel immediately out of the gate. It feels supremely stable. At low speeds, when you're not really going for it, the car gives you quite a lot of confidence. You can definitely feel where all four corners are, even though, as I mentioned before, the rear axle is doing a little bit of steering. The side effect of that at lower speeds is the car feels very, very pointy on the front. You can just tuck the nose in wherever you want it to go, and the rear will follow us accordingly. Just watch the gauge cluster here with all the different green and white bars going around. The white bar you see going around the circumference of the tach, that is your electric motor delivery. See, as I roll on the throttle, it picks up a whole lot quicker than the revs on the internal combustion engine do. And obviously that's just providing some supplementary torque action. The engine will rev all the way up to 9,000 RPM, so you're in Ferrari 458 and 488 territory when it comes to revs on a street-legal V8 engine. Absolutely spectacular. And I've got to say, it sounds pretty cool, too. There was the full 9,000 for you. And remember, this is just in sport hybrid mode, and you can see that acceleration. The bottom of the tach, you may have noticed these green bars cycling around. On the left side, those green bars are indicating discharge of the battery. So you'll notice when I get on the throttle, that green bar will start to tick upward toward the left. And that, of course, is indicative of the batteries discharging, putting energy into the electric motors, and then propelling the car forward. On the right side of the tach, when I come off the throttle, and particularly onto the brakes, you'll see that starts to tick up. That is your regen. So that's energy that the electric motors are now gathering from the inertia of the car and putting it back into the battery pack. Unlike on LaFerrari and on FXXK, you're not able to adjust the rate of regen. See, the car gets very, very sideways there. That's what I mean by sometimes it reacts a little strangely, but anyway, you're not able to control the rate of regen. It's a constant thing, and the car is always looking to harvest some of the energy that it's already put out. The side effect of this is you just have to bear with it in terms of the regen, because sometimes it can catch you out along with the four-wheel steering, but at the same time, the car tends to be a little bit more economical with its energy use. Unlike on the McLaren P1 or LaFerrari or the FXXK, where you're able to run out of electricity, this car takes a whole lot longer to get to that critical battery state where there's no longer any usable power in the system. Certainly, this probably pays many, many dividends on the street. On the track, though, I would like to be able to just unleash a little bit more of that battery pack. Up in race hybrid here, there's a little bit more power. It's not really noticeable on your end. On my end, things feel a little bit more torquey, but still it's quite similar to the sport hybrid system. Or setting, rather. Then hot lap, of course. This is the maximum capacity for everything. And you can see it wants to go. The brakes on this thing are as you would expect from a car of this pedigree. Comparable performance to LaFerrari and the McLaren P1. You'd expect nothing less. from something that costs this much and, of course, is squarely aimed at competing with those two aforementioned cars. The gearbox is very responsive. The shifts are pretty much instantaneous in the upward direction. Downshifting is a little interesting. Yes, of course, it is all computer controlled, but when the gear first engages on the downshift, you do get a blip on the throttle to help you rev match, but you also get a boost of torque from the rear axle, the electric motor on the rear axle, to make sure that you really are rev matched. And when you're in a heavy braking situation, that little extra blip that you get after the engine has done its blip can sometimes unsettle the rear end, especially if you've already started to turn into a corner. So in terms of your driving style in this car, you really want to make sure that you get all your downshifts done in a straight line. And watch here going into turn 1, you'll see that there's a secondary blip. The revs pick up a little bit again, even after the initial blip from the engine. Right there was pretty telling. The four-wheel steering system. It's noticeable. You can't see it operating, unfortunately. And in the real world, I'm not entirely sure how much those rear wheels will actually start to turn. It's really a toe adjustment in terms of what the rear wheels are doing in terms of their attitude relative to the chassis. But I don't imagine it's very much deflection at all, maybe half a degree, 1 degree, something like that. But you do notice it. The car almost feels like it turns in twice. You get your initial bite from the front end, and then the rear catches up with it, and then some. So your turn-ins don't need to be nearly as aggressive as you might think. See, not much turn of the wheel at all, and it easily makes it around the corner. Power delivery from the engine is surprisingly linear. Yes, it is normally aspirated, so that's maybe not so surprising, but electric motors have instant torque from 0. So, for example, when you're in the SF15T Formula 1 car, and you're at full boost, you are, in some circumstances, caught out by that instant torque. That doesn't exist. And I think you can tell this by watching that white bar across the top of the tach. You can see that even when I just bury the throttle straight away, that bar takes a little while to catch up with where the engine revs are. Through some logical deduction, I'm assuming that the electric motors are not strictly on an on-off switch. They are being ramped up linearly in relation to my throttle output, or input rather. So they're behaving more or less like a turbo does. Generally, the car's very, very well behaved. Quite strange for an all-wheel drive car is the fact that the thing will actually drift for you if you want. Not going to be able to do it here on this on-camber corner. But it is happy going sideways. Chassis dynamics remain reasonably stable, even in those high-stress sideways situations. And you can see I'm actually trying to induce a little bit of oversteer, and it's not really having it. Car will drift, believe me, but it's not really wanting to through some of these corners. Yeah, it's just glued to the road entirely right now. All this does mean that the car is very accessible. So for some of you players who maybe aren't quite as experienced, you will be able to have a good time in this thing, straight out of the box. And because it is so stable, you will be able to approach its limits in a rather controllable manner. I would think that that then translates into reality to say that this car is probably the perfect combination of luxury and performance, because it is quite docile generally all around. But yeah, just to compare it to something like a Lamborghini, you know, similar four-wheel drive system, mid-engine layout. If I were to just jump on the throttle mid-corner like that, the thing would spin in a heartbeat. This, nope, everything's perfectly under control. Making sure that the traction control was off there. It was. Still no drama whatsoever. There's a little bit of sideways action starting there. Totally controllable. And it starts to get a little unruly. You can get it back into line very easily indeed. I'm still not entirely sure how the car truly stacks up compared to its competitors, LaFerrari and the McLaren P1. You saw the video that I made at Mugello. This car won the race. Not by much, though, and I have to say that I was being a little bit cheeky against that P1, trying to keep him behind. If left to their own devices in the real world, I'm going to say the P1 is the fastest of the bunch, followed by LaFerrari, and ultimately followed by this thing. Outbraked myself a little bit there. However, in terms of an all-around driving experience, I have to say this car is the best of the bunch. LaFerrari is nervous in its general attitude. McLaren P1, it's just very, very high-strung, but a little bit soulless. This thing, I think, is the perfect marriage between a controllable, more relaxed experience, and of course you've got plenty of performance there when you really want to stomp on the loud pedal. And of course, the straight line speed does not hurt either. back in the pits now. All in all, it is a very, very cool driving experience, this car, and basically all of the other Porsches that they've brought in with these DLCs so far. Very, very welcome addition to Assetto Corsa. I am very happy that Porsche finally decided to get into sim racing in an official capacity, because they make some absolutely incredible products, and I think it is really a public service to be able to give us, mere mortals, the chance to drive these kinds of cars in a realistic representation, because obviously most of us will never get the chance to drive one of these, much less own one. So I think this is a very, very good marketing strategy by the Audi Porsche VW group, considering their recent financial issues, which I actually think are ingenious, to be honest. A full confession, I was a Volkswagen owner for quite a while. I had a Beetle that I inherited, and let's see, it was a 99, and it always had emissions issues. I could never get it to pass emissions here in New Jersey. But I did find, because I enjoy tinkering and whatever, I did find that when I disabled all of the environmental protection stuff, like the secondary air system, EGR, and all that kind of stuff, the car ran a whole lot better. So when Volkswagen came out saying, oh yeah, we were cheating emissions for years, I was like, aha, that's why. So I have a little bit of a soft spot for the Porsche Audi VW group, and I have to say I'm very, very happy that they finally decided to put some of their hypercars into Assetto Corsa, because I enjoy them, and I think most of you will as well. So as I said, I've got a couple of videos already up that have highlighted this car, but I thought it was time for a more official type of review for it. If you don't have the DLC yet, it is $6.99 on Steam. Don't quote me on that. I think it's $6.99. It's either $5.99 or $6.99. But anyway, it's not going to break your bank, and it is certainly a very worthy investment for all of you. It's really going to showcase the newest build of AC version 1.9.2 that I think just came out this morning. And of course, you can look at the changelog. We talked a little bit about that in my review of the 917. But in any event, hopefully this was enjoyable for you, and as always, stay tuned for a couple hot lap replays in this thing at the Full Beans, of course, around here at Brands Hatch. So, thank you very, very much. Stay tuned for the hot lap.